Ambition is what drives most humans to their goals, things that can either be good or bad if you know where its heart lies, especially if it lies deep within the jungles of nature. A type seen in Tarzan, as that story is of a man getting raised in the jungle by gorillas and other animals. What we all know in this man trying to fit into the world with opinions of the leader Kerchak and coming face to his human origins again by a bunch of explorers and hunters, where the hunter amongst them happens to be William Cecil Clayton, the main antagonist of this journey, who initially appears as a backup guardian for the porters, but actually a man with ambitions to poach gorillas and sell them across the world, and one who happens to be voiced by Boss Nass from Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace, the Gungan leader of the Gungans. And this comes at the tail end of the Renaissance era in 1999, with a period of movies that were mostly dedicated to exploring both the concept of monsters and men, knowing the difference in your hero and in your villain, with a more specific focus on the type of man you can be when it comes to both Tarzan and Clayton and their true inner nature that differs from the outside appearances and circumstances from which they were raised. Your initial comparisons to those who seem civilized, raised in modern civilization, and then those who are wild beasts raised into the jungle. It's very different from their novel counterparts, where Clayton wasn't actually a villain and was Tarzan's paternal cousin, as Tarzan's real name was actually John Clayton, and conceals Tarzan's own real identity until his death, where he redeemed himself for his selfish desires of Jane and letting them get together when he dies. Where this version of the villain is more inspired by other characters from the novel, including Nicholas Rokoff, who is more of the villain in that regard and also finally appeared in the Legend of Tarzan series for one episode. But the whole point of this version relates to more about what I just said, about where a person comes from and how they use it depending on their own types of views. It also seems logical for me to talk about this next when it comes to other villains like Rourke, including in my original list of villains who get revealed towards the very end. Not that he's completely that type of villain to the audience, or even the most basic observations based on his appearance alone would actually lead you to believe he is the villain from the start, but how the real juice of the story is found within his own humanity slipping away, gradually revealing a brute of the jungle compared to the true man of Tarzan himself. So that the whole point of him as a villain is to reveal the irony of the civilized man to revert back to his primitive barbarian instincts. One that we also should discuss for the interesting fact he has one of the most violent Disney villain deaths ever seen on screen, as most tend to do fall down to their demise or meet other explosive fates. Of course, it's not completely on screen, but it does flash before your eyes in a brief second when Tarzan sees his hanged corpse, which is very brutal and somewhat very brave for them to do nowadays, but also very important to represent the fate if someone goes too far in their own ambition. And to start things off, we have to note that this film actually has two villains for its two halves, well, mainly a quarter and then for the rest. Our predominant focus of course on Clayton, and the one animal responsible for Tarzan's parents' death in Sabor, the aggressive leopard feared across the jungle that tears up anything in its path as prey. In the beginning of the film, Tarzan's family was shipwrecked in the jungles of Africa, doing their best to survive and to raise him in this environment until they got killed by Sabor, who did the same thing earlier to Kerchak and Kala's young son, eating him in front of their own eyes. And how as a result, she finds him left with Sabor still watching above as a trap to get her, but managing to escape and wanting to raise him in their son's place for what they both lost in their families. That we learn here that the initial villain is the uncharted wild nature of the jungle with beasts like Sabor who threatens all life for their bloodthirsty hunger, while also having those like Kerchak question if it's right to have a human like him in their family for what they could bring on the other hand, knowing the dangers that we face as a species. So we get this picture of a dual nature between two worlds as the song by Phil Collins plays, with the message of one family and the hope of acceptance despite our clear differences. That he grows up trying to learn and understand more about himself and why Kerchak doesn't accept him as his son yet until Sabor comes back years later when he became an adult. He then kills the beast who killed his parents and their son, which begins to change things in Kerchak's perspective a bit, albeit reluctantly of course, when the sound of guns blazes across in the distance. This is then our first real introduction to Clayton, and then the porters who traverse the jungle in search of exploration, specifically of course gorillas. Although our journey with Sabor was short-lived, it still paved the way forward in the picture of who Tarzan has to face and realize who he is more than what he seems to others like his non-adoptive father. Because if you notice, Clayton's outfit and colors are kinda similar to Sabor, meaning her threatening presence still lingers on even from the start with his parents' death, now passed on in a human form like Clayton, which was actually confirmed in the commentary of the film, wanting to continue on this theme of a predatory threat that exists in all types of forms. And the human form allows us to open up more conversations about Tarzan's past with his own real parents and the original knowledge coming from novels that they were related cousins. Of course, it still could have been possible that they could have been cousins in this adaptation, but that really wasn't discussed nor written down, so we'll just go with the dual nature of humans overall. But what we learned here is that he's mostly here for protection of Archimedes and Jane Porter, who are out here in the jungle to study gorillas with Tarzan sneaking close by. Like, when we first see him and hear him speak, we can already make the assumption that his nature is a bit dubious with his own intent, antagonistic, wielding his big shotgun out for protection even while Jane asks him not to shoot out of scaring the gorillas off, responding by simply saying he's hired for such protection and he's going to protect by any means possible.
You hired me to protect you, Miss Porter, and protect you I shall.
Like, who knows what it means by the way he secretly acts, declaring them as wild beasts and savages who would tear them apart as predators if they could. It is simply based on the ideology of the civilized man who conquers the plains as seen fit, yearning to tame it for his own purpose. Yet how that purpose is corrupted, appearing as the very thing they seek to destroy or use. An example of this is seen when Tarzan sneaks around him and hears it pulling out its shotgun, that at the slightest hint of animal movement, he shoots at an aimless target like a wild beast ready to hunt, again pulling him back to the brutal nature of Sabor, who kills without a single thought. Her nature was just to be a predator, which Clayton is also acting as and not knowing as such a civilized man. That immediately we see his inherent nature that shows a mindless monster that is contrasting with the curious kind nature of Tarzan, who manages to rescue Jane after getting caught amongst the other wild animals, to which whom we learn of her name and then where she comes from. But on the other hand, with what she witnesses and talks about, he still appears to be the rationalized civilized figure who doesn't have the faintest clue about what she is even talking about, which anyone could probably deem crazy if they have not seen the events we have just witnessed. Until of course she mentions that there were gorillas, piquing his interest hanging out with the ape-man Tarzan. It's a perfect moment to contrast them since they both discover something they want to see when they also meet up, with Tarzan of course being upset at the fact that his current family doesn't want him involved with the humans and then wanting to learn more about himself. The problem of course with the scene is that he never really interacted with humans before, and Clayton's methods don't really help unless it involves Jane, that he gets more interested in her and learns about man from her perspective rather than Clayton, who keeps continuing to shove him gorilla to his face. But I'm pretty sure in these moments he's willingly ignoring that question every time it's brought up, even if he doesn't initially understand the pictures shoved in front of him, saying that he can't because of Kerchak and their relationship and his family, which is more harmful to bring about with people like Clayton. Which unfortunately makes things more complicated because the captain wants to pick them up to go back to London until he of course comes in to learn about what they wanted to see, wanting her to stay but can't. The opportune moment for Clayton himself to manipulate Tarzan on what Jane wanted to see with her father in exchange to, stay.
If only she could have spent more time with the gorillas. She's so disappointed, crushed really.
If Jane sees gorillas, she stays?
Say, that's why she came, isn't it?
The strategy for him is here to lure out the gorillas for his own personal gain rather than the search of their own, and reminding us his sly hidden attitude about them. The prey wanted to strike at the right moment, which again to remind all of you is the basic continuation of Sabor, who begun this film by attacking without notice compared to Clayton, who's more steady in his approach, only for him to reach that same peak once we get to that part of the film. They all finally get to meet the gorillas, which satisfies the crew, except for the fact that they might appear to be too curious, and how their location is now mapped out by Clayton. And Kerchak returns later to much fury, seeing more of them as a threat, attacking them until Tarzan stops him, but feeling betrayed at these actions for what he did to allow such forces to come in when he should have protected them, to finally reveal the truth of his real family who were killed long ago. Wakala shows this so he can be happy where he feels best fit, that if it's not here, then maybe he should go off with the species he belongs to rather than those who did not want him out of fear of protection, and how he does go off, but not without hugging his mom who did raise him. That if he can't fit here by his actions or looks, then maybe it's best to go with him, with whom he now loves in Jane. But how that turns out to be a big mistake when Clayton reveals that he betrays the Porters and Tarzan for his own profitable gain, all for him to sell off the gorillas knowing their location for about 300 pounds sterling each, finally becoming the trafficker we all expect him to be, hunting for profit like the beast that he is.
Couldn't have done it without you.
That his true goal in his civilized mind is to tame the forest by selling it off, taking piece by piece until it enriches himself off the backs of one man who was raised the wrong way in the wild, deciding to betray his family by going with them. It's not really a complicated ambition compared to other villains, but it's one that is enough to satisfy the true story of where a person should belong, those who understand and those who do not, when he's finally freed by his friends to go back to erase the mistakes with his family, since he does care about all of them. That in the midst of finally capturing his prey, representing Sabor's missing piece that she didn't catch with Kerchak, he arrives in time to stop them with his friends and poach the poachers back. That this is where we finally get to see his true heart, because he didn't think he'd come back, yet how he explains that this is his home and he'd do his best to protect it no matter what, while Clayton becomes enraged to reveal his real persona. That in his hunting mode, his hair is more messy, no longer slicked back like he usually does to clean it up, to show a more untamed interior. That you can only go so far before you reach your boiling point for a goal that is yet to be claimed. And just like the wildness of the jungle, it shows his true animalistic hunger and brutal intent that harms the ecosystem of a family rather than protects or preserves it. And it works up to the point where he manages to shoot down Kerchak while going head to head against Tarzan himself.
I can use a challenge, because after I get rid of you, rounding up your little ape family will be all too easy!
That he yearns for this challenge willingly for the hunt, just like Sabor did, attempting once again to finish the job for his own personal gain, with a cycle that repeats itself back to the beginning of an unknown background that pounces in the shadows either physically or metaphorically. And again, that's the direction that the creators wanted to go, with their final brutal fight with him aiming for the kill and even pressing Tarzan with his gun to shoot him to be a man.
Go ahead, shoot me. Be a man.
Which can actually apply two ways in terms of acting like a man or being an actual man by civilized standards, yet how he doesn't and fakes a shot by his mouth to prove what kind of man that he is. That Tarzan declares that he is a man, but he isn't going to be a savage man like Clayton, but a real man who protects his home and cares for his family, finally tying the knot of the monster and man message and what it really means with his gun now finally destroyed. But unfortunately, knowing the true character, he never gives up, giving in to his animalistic urges to try to kill Tarzan by any means possible with his machete, slashing down vines to try to get them as they fall a little bit below the trees. It's a great parallel to what he had dealt with earlier when he was hidden beneath Sabor, but instead of defeating and killing like he did back there, he evades Clayton as much as possible when he starts to notice the vines wrap around him, calling out his name, warning that this might strangle him if he continues down this path. That he pulls back to remember who he is compared to what he could be, seeing the mirrored image to save Clayton from a self-inflicted doom before it turns out to be too late, which unfortunately it already is for him, where he's already gone too far to care or understand until it snaps, where all he can do now is scream towards his inevitable downfall and hung up in the most brutal Disney death displayed in the shadows. That it was finally done in this way to represent the unavoidable path and truth of a wrong idea or thought that man can have about the world or caring about in families, in terms of one willing to break it up for his own profitability and the hunger being too much to stop, like a leopard who leapt for the child or the parents of those who just wanted to live a life of love with their families. That you wouldn't care if your ambition or ideals overpowers your senses of the lives around you, where it comes back to bite you in the worst possible way and wrap you in that same fate, ironically clothing you in your initial definitions and delusions you found those beneath you had. While others like Kerchak finally realizes the truth of such love that they forgot, that he always did care no matter whose definition told who he was, calling Tarzan his son finally, taking care of the rest as a promise to his father and living with the porters of a life that is full and free. The true lesson we must all learn here is that even though we might appear to be two worlds apart, we are still one family fighting for the same team and not by ourselves to preconceptions and territorial hunger that harms not only others but all of us. That man and the jungle are one and the same, whether you be on the side of the predator or the prey, and the harmonious nature of living as one. And you don't have to be a civilized minded individual to see that. And I'm all done. Goodbye.